기조연설 1부 순서를 진행하겠습니다. 기조연설 1부에서는 네 분의 기조연설자께서 발표를 하시겠습니다. 자, 오늘 역사적인 개막연설은 빌 클린턴 전 미국 대통령께서 화상을 통해서 해주시겠습니다. 클린턴 대통령은 8년간의 대통령 재임 기간 중에 교육개혁과 인재 양성에 있어서 역대 미국 대통령 가운데 가장 탁월한 업적을 남긴 분으로 평가받고 있습니다. 이를 기반으로 미국의 경제 르네상스라고 불리는 신경제 시대를 일으켰다는 그런 칭송을 받고 있는 분이기도 합니다. 클린턴 대통령은 인간을 통한 지구촌의 공동 번영을 추구하는 글로벌 인적자원 포럼의 취지에 전적으로 공감하면서 이 개막연설을 기꺼이 수락해 주셨습니다. 오늘 글로벌 시대에 인류가 직면한 중요한 도전에 대해서 개막연설을 통해서 여러분께 아주 의미 있는 메시지를 전달하겠다고 했습니다. 자, 그럼 지금부터 클린턴 전 미국 대통령의 개막연설을 경청하시겠습니다. 자, 빌 클린턴 전 미국 대통령의 개막연설을 함께 하셨습니다. 자, 이번에는 이 시대 최고의 외교관으로 꼽히는 리처드 홀브루크 전 유엔 주재 미국 대사님을 여러분께 소개해드리겠습니다. 홀브루크 대사께서는 1990년대 이 공산주의 체제가 붕괴하는 과정에서 발발한 이 발칸반도의 내전을 종식시키고 또 평화가 정착될 수 있도록 탁월한 협상력과 리더십을 발휘했을 뿐만이 아니라 그간의 그 수많은 외교적인 업적을 쌓은 분으로 평가받고 있습니다. 자, 홀브루크 대사께서는 글로벌 탤런트 그리고 글로벌 프로스페리티라는 이번 포럼의 창설 취지에 공감하시고 그동안 직업 외교관으로서의 경험과 또 탁월한 식견을 바탕으로 해서 오늘 다문화, 다언어, 다양성의 시대 글로벌 리더십의 조건이라는 주제로 연설을 해주시겠습니다. 그러면 리처드 홀브루크 대사님을 여러분의 많은 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you very much for inviting me here, and I am honored especially to follow the president on whose cabinet I was privileged to serve, President Clinton. I congratulate the organizers of this conference, Deputy Prime Minister Kim, President Shin, Mr. Lee, and their colleagues for bringing us together to discuss human resources. In recent years, I've participated in many conferences around the world on many issues, from the rise of China to problems in the environment. But this is the first conference that I've attended that focuses on the people themselves. And it is people, that is human resources, who determine everything else. It is people who must solve the problems that they themselves have created, or else these problems will overwhelm humanity. When I looked at the schedule for this forum, I was struck by how ambitious it is on one hand, and yet how narrow it is on the other. You will discuss here issues ranging from innovation in higher education to creative talent development in the culture industry. Many, many specific, specialized issues. For all this, I congratulate you. Your focus on people is correct and visionary. People are the measure. But we need to think more openly about the issue, beyond the narrow constructs of the breakout groups that you will participate in. No country illustrates this more clearly than Korea itself. This divided, war-torn country without natural resources that rose to such a position of global importance through just one factor, the strength, the unity and determination of the Korean people. It is by now well known that international economists looking at the so-called developing world in the 1950s and the 1960s, thought Korea was unlikely, very unlikely, to develop rapidly because it had no natural resources, because it was politically unstable, because it faced a dangerous adversary just a few miles from where we sit today. Economists thought that other countries, and they noted the Philippines, some of the countries of Africa, and the oil-rich countries of OPEC in the Middle East and Venezuela, in Nigeria and elsewhere. They thought that these were the countries that would be the star economic performers. How wrong they were. And why were they so wrong, both about those countries and especially about Korea? Simply put, the economists ignored the most important resource of all, human resource, people. I came to observe this firsthand in my many trips over the last 35 years to this extraordinary country. I first visited Korea in 1972. I remember so well the 10 p.m. curfew, the state of the country. It was already beginning to grow, but just less than 20 years after the end of the Korean War, with a curfew, with a military government, with a highly fractured and tense situation in Northeast Asia, with Asia itself still in turmoil, it seemed a different world. I have so many memories of Korea as it grew. I remember the chairman of Hyundai, the founding chairman, Chairman Chung, coming to New York and sitting in my office overlooking the East River and looking down on the construction that was going on the FDR Drive and looking at the workers who weren't working very hard and saying, if you will give that contract to Korea, we will finish ahead of schedule and under budget. And I believed him, and of course he was right. I remember your country growing so that each trip here was like visiting a different city and a different country. I remember the political turmoil, the upheavals, the drama of 1978 and 79, the period leading up to the Olympics, the achievement of full democracy, and the growth of Korea into a world economic power. This was a tribute, an extraordinary tribute to the strength and unity and determination of the Korean people, determined to overcome their history and put Korea on the map. In my travels in every part of the world, I have seen no other country in which human resources made such a difference. And it is an extraordinary sight, and I am particularly glad that the organizers of this conference have invited here people from other countries who I hope will learn from the Korean example. Korea's growth will, of course, continue. Economic growth is part of your national destiny and part of your national pride. But its originating motives, what drove Korea from the end of the war 54 years ago until today, those originating motives will inevitably diminish and dissipate over time, and as new generations come to maturity who did not live through the extraordinary history of Korea. The Korean drive to prove yourselves will slowly erode as you succeed. And as the memories of the Japanese occupation and the Korean War and the military regime turn into stories in history books, not the living lessons of yourselves, your parents, and your grandparents. Younger Koreans are already showing signs of greater individualism, which is good, less discipline, and even at times a weaker family structure. Growth is growth is essential for Korea. All of you know that, and we appreciate it, we who visit you. But it carries with it consequences, not all of them equally good. We have seen this in Europe. We have seen it in Japan, and we have certainly seen it in my country, the United States. Korea is not immune to the inevitable consequences of its own success. And I do not see much evidence that this has yet been thought about seriously. What about globalization? Korea has been a huge beneficiary of globalization. Yet it remains a closed area to most of the rest of the world, culturally and psychologically closed. I'm a great admirer, personally, of Korean culture, Korean values, Korean art, Korean achievement, and Korean cuisine. But I wonder how Korea will adjust to the need to become more open to other people. How will it affect Korea as your society becomes more open and you accept more diversity, not just from Americans, but from other Asians who will want to live in Korea and be part of the Korean dream, the way so many Koreans themselves have been part of the dream in the United States. Your strength, your unity, is also a potential weakness in certain ways. National pride is your strength. Do not let it also become your weakness. Our country, the United States, is certainly not immune from these problems, and I do not come here today to educate or lecture Koreans, but to share with you the perception of the fact that your strengths carry the seeds of problems that you have not yet begun to address, and which we in the United States are dealing with only with the greatest of difficulty. One of the issues that will come to a head inevitably is China. The development of relations between China and the Republic of Korea has been enormously beneficial to both nations and also to peace and stability in Northeast Asia. I remember so well when I was Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian Affairs under President Carter in the difficult period from 1977 to 1981, as we normalized relations with China, strengthened ties with Korea during a very tumultuous period that included the assassination of President Park Chung-hee. I remember so vividly that in those days when you flew from Tokyo to Beijing, you had to fly around Korea. You could not overfly Korea. That if you wanted to go from Seoul to Beijing, you had to fly back to Tokyo or Osaka to change planes. And that relations between the two countries were non-existent. Today, with direct relations, economic, political, cultural, both countries have been enormous beneficiaries. But the continued rise of China poses challenges and questions, which, while they are outside the scope of this conference, I urge you not to ignore. Another problem which greatly concerns me is the education of a new generation of Koreans. I am told that many Koreans, young Koreans, are learning a revisionist version of their own history, one in which they're told, for example, some of them are told that the outbreak of war in Korea in June of 1950 was caused equally by both North and South Korea. Such wild historical distortions concern me greatly. If a new generation of Koreans does not know its own history because they haven't lived through it and have been misled by teachers or inaccurate history, then the future of Korea will be put under pressure, put under doubt. Koreans must know their own history to retain pride in what makes Korea a unique country with such unique strength. The future of Korea is very, very bright, and you can count on America's continued commitment and support to your security and your economic prosperity. But I urge you to make sure that the next generation of Koreans is equally aware of the relationship and what each of our countries has done for the other, and our enduring ties and historical accuracy about the last 60 years. Koreans are now a vital and growing part of our country, the United States, as well. This is an enormously important fact linking the United States and Korea. From Los Angeles to New York, Korean Americans are emerging as a major force in American economic, social, political, and cultural life. As chairman of the Asia Society, I am especially proud of this fact. Many of the people in this room have been associated with me through Asia Society. Many of your leaders have spoken at Asia Society in New York, and many of your leading economic and business leaders have been members of Asia Society Board. We have provided a continual forum in the United States for discussions of U.S. and Korean issues, but originally there were not Korean Americans involved. Today, Korean Americans are part of our board, and I am very proud to say that we will be formally announcing the formation of Asia Society Korea Center later this next month, and it will be a very exciting thing to have a full-time center of Asia Society here in Seoul to join our other centers in Washington, Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Shanghai, Mumbai, Melbourne, Hong Kong, and Manila. This will be a very exciting event and only symbolizing the deepening ties between Koreans and Americans as exemplified by Koreans who have chosen to move to the United States. And I know that there are many of you in this room today who were born in Korea and came to the United States. Last night I spoke with a professor who will be addressing you later, and we were talking to a member of the Korean leadership of this conference, and the Korean official said to me that the professor is a Korean. And I said, no, he is an American from Korea. That is the way our country works, and we're very, very proud of it. In that spirit, the rest of the world, especially the developing nations, have much to learn from this conference. And all of us, but again, especially from the developing world, have an enormous amount to learn from the Korean miracle, which is based on their heavy emphasis on human resources. And Korea, in my view, still has things to learn. And I don't just mean technology from the rest of the world. I am proud to be part of this conference. I am honored to have been able to speak to you today, and I look forward to a very good conference. Thank you very much, and my best wishes to all of you.
네, 리처드 홀브루크 전 유엔 주재 미국 대사님의 기조 연설 대단히 감사합니다. 자, 이번에는 여러분께 프랜시스 후쿠야마 존스 홉킨스 대학 교수님을 소개해드리겠습니다. 후쿠야마 교수님은 공산주의 체계제가 붕괴하기 시작한 지난 1989년 마르크스적 의미의 역사는 끝났다라는 내용의 역사의 종말이라는 논문으로 세계적인 주목을 받으셨습니다. 그 이후에 신뢰야말로 공동체를 지탱하는 핵심 사회 자본이라는 내용의 저서 트러스트를 집필해서 큰 반향을 불러일으킨 바 있습니다. 이 교수님은 지난해 출범 초기부터 기조연설을 계속 맡아주셨을 정도로 이번 포럼에 아주 적극적으로 호응을 해주고 계신데요. 한국에도 굉장히 많은 그 열성 팬을 갖고 계시다고 합니다. 자, 그럼 프랜시스 후쿠야마 존스 홉킨스 대학 교수님을 여러분의 많은 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be invited back to the Global Human Resources Forum. Last year's conference I thought was a really great success for initiating a discussion on this critical topic, and I note that it is larger and better attended this year, so congratulations to the organizers. I should point out that my school, the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, has a lot of Korean graduates, and in the past year we established a U.S. Korean Institute as well as an academic concentration in Korean studies. Our academic board, the senior faculty members who decide academic policy, had a debate. We have concentrations on India and China. These are countries with 1 billion people in them each. And there was some discussion whether Korea with about 40 million people was big enough to merit its own concentration among our students. And I think the end of that discussion led us to the conclusion that it is not numbers, but quality and influence in the global economy and world system that merit academic attention to a particular country or region, and that Korea, by its achievements, had certainly merited that. And so we are very happy to have expanded our curriculum in this fashion. What I'd like to do today is to talk about what was the subject of my second book, Trust, but apply it to the question that is facing you in this Global Human Resources Forum, which is perhaps a different way of thinking about the human resource problem. Most people, when they talk about human resources, think about it as human capital. This is a metaphor, of course, that economists use for the intangible skills and knowledge that people carry around with them in their heads. And they, using the economic metaphor, talk about investing in human capital, which usually means building schools, universities, training centers, and teaching people skills that will be useful in an economy. Now, that's an important way of thinking about human resources, but there is another type of capital which some social scientists have labeled social capital that I think is actually critical in understanding how human resources are actually used in organizations. Social capital I would define as informal norms or values that promote human cooperation, from two people helping each other out on a weekend, moving their apartment, all the way up to a large corporation trying to develop the next generation computer technology. Now, it is of course true in a modern rule of law society that we have many formal mechanisms for producing social cooperation. This is why we have so many lawyers and a court system and a whole apparatus of contracts and negotiations. That's not what is meant by social capital. Social capital really have to do with the virtues, the private virtues of reciprocity, of honesty, of keeping commitments that exist between people that are in a moral relationship with one another that then promotes the possibility of collective action. And it has a lot of uses. In the economy, if you are dealing with people who are basically honest and not opportunistic, you save on what economists call transaction costs. In the polity, in the political order, social capital is really the basis for civil society. All of those networks of organizations by which people come together to pool their interests, to make the government accountable, to hold it up to certain standards that reflect the interests and the passions of its citizens. And so for both economic and political reasons, I think social capital is critical to the functioning of any democratic market-based economies. But of course, not all norms and values promote the right kind of cooperation. The mafia, the Ku Klux Klan are all examples of organizations that have social capital but that promote hatred or distrust and have very negative consequences for the societies in which they are embedded. Furthermore, not every society has social capital distributed in the same way. In Asia, for example, in Confucian societies, and I would count Korea as one along with China, there is an ideological predisposition to favor family ties over ties, let's say, to political authority or to more impersonal forms of social relationship. This is actually quite different from the kind of social structure that emerged in feudal Japan, in which loyalty to one's political overlord trumped or took precedence over loyalty to the family. And one of the consequences was the rise of the modern Japanese corporation in an earlier period of Japanese economic history and the dominance of family businesses in many of the more Chinese parts of East Asia. It's a pattern that exists in other parts of the world. Families are important everywhere. They're important, for example, in Latin America, where many dominant companies in the market sector are owned by networks of family members. The United States is different in this respect because it's always had a very dense civil society. It's had a high level of social capital, something that many observers of the United States have noted for many years. And I think this accounts in part for the ease with which Americans have developed flexible and evolving forms of corporate organization over the years. Now, let me just go through some of the changes. I think a lot of you that deal with business organization would be quite familiar with the next few slides. But we've obviously been going through a really major change in the nature of authority, both in private sector, but also, I think, to some extent in public sector organizations. The world was dominated by large, hierarchical, centralized organizations at the beginning of the 20th century. The classic Ford factory in Highland Park, Michigan, was built like a military organization with centralized command and control. And this has been giving way to firms that are flatter, that in some cases have virtualized themselves through outsourcing, and even to networks that are not centralized in any manner. So you've gone from something that looks like this. This was the model of corporate organization by Frederick Winslow Taylor, the industrial engineer at the beginning of the 20th century, who argued for this type of hierarchical organization. And you're now moving to things like flat organizations in which you have movement in two directions. You have a movement of a greater span of control upwards in the organization to senior management, and a delegation of greater responsibility downward to actually the factory floor in many cases. And then as we move to things like outsourcing, you had classic vertically integrated companies that tried to do everything within the boundaries of their organizations, and you're now moving to virtualize or outsource many of those functions. And in fact, in Silicon Valley, you even have chip makers that do not do their own manufacturing. They send this out to other fabs that do their manufacturing for them. Then finally, many people have talked about Silicon Valley as a whole as being actually itself a species of network organization. Perhaps it looks something more like this, with some degree of hierarchy, but clearly no central controlling brain, but rather a lot of decentralized nodes that cooperate with each other, that pass information in a very flexible and quick-moving way. And some arguments have been made that this type of organization actually represents the future of all organizations. I think for a variety of reasons this will never happen. You need hierarchy and centralization for many functions, but clearly networks are dominant in many parts of the global economy. Apart from Silicon Valley, you have the networks of manufacturers in central Italy that make things like machine tools and design and textiles, motorcycles, and the like. You have this large area in central China that has become one of the great hubs for manufacturing motorcycles based on the collusion or the cooperation of many small firms that are able to deal with one another much more flexibly than our large centralized organizations. Now, many people, if you open the page of any business periodical, people have been writing about this shift for some years now, but I think people misunderstand what is behind the possibility of moving to this type of organization. And it really has to do with this concept, social capital, that I was discussing. because I think in all cases, when you move from a centralized hierarchical organization that is based on command and control to one that delegates much greater degrees of authority or outsources it or shifts entirely to decentralized organization, what you are doing is you are substituting social capital for formal control and hierarchy. That is to say, hierarchies are established to monitor the performance of workers and to punish or reward them based on that performance. But I think that there are other ways of achieving that same goal. If the standards for performance are internalized as a matter of values on the part of the workers themselves, if the monitoring is done internally and not by an external boss sitting there with a stopwatch and a clipboard, then it is obviously going to be more efficient. And therefore, you can delegate much greater degrees of responsibility in an organization that has high degrees of social capital. You do not need that extensive formal system for monitoring the performance of your workers. Now, why has all of this been happening? I think there are deep sociological reasons why you've had a shift to the greater reliance on social capital. A lot of it is actually an insight that the great economist Friedrich Hayek noted way back about 50 or 60 years ago when he talked about the importance of local knowledge in a modern economy. At that time, he was involved in a debate with other great economists like Joseph Schumpeter over whether socialism would work. And Hayek ultimately won that debate because he observed that in any complex modern economy, the vast bulk of knowledge that is passed around in it is local in nature. It is the worker on the factory floor that knows that there's a problem in the production process, not someone high up in the hierarchy. And as technological complexity increases, you have the greater need for sources of decision-making that are close to sources of local knowledge. And this is, of course, one of the reasons why ultimately capitalism beats socialism, because what a market economy is distributed, decentralized decision-making on the part of buyers and sellers that manage to coordinate their activities without any kind of central control. But on an organizational level, those organizations that make use of local knowledge and can process local information closer to the source also save enormously over organizations that have to move information up and down hierarchical channels. And a lot of this is related to rising levels of overall education. In a classic automobile factory in the United States, half the workers did not speak English. Up until the 1950s, a majority of them did not even have an 8th grade education. And so in some respects, it was necessary to control them through a large military-style hierarchy. If you think about any professional organization of architects, doctors, lawyers, or you think about an organization like Microsoft that has PhD electrical engineers or software programmers as the workers, the basic workers in the organization, you're obviously not going to be able to monitor their performance in anything like the classic Taylorite manner. And furthermore, the kinds of products that consumers demand requires a better ability to cycle products and to get information from the marketplace back into the production process. And again, all of this is better served by decision makers that are closer to sources of local knowledge, therefore more decentralized. And so that's why I think that instead of those old organization diagrams, we actually chart the nature of societies more through these circles. You might call them circles of trust. And so the largest circle perhaps represents the society as a whole. In Korea, there are Korean values, there are things that all Koreans hold in common, but then there are local communities, there are immigrants, there are people that are to some degree inside and some degree outside the community. There are some groups that are wholly subordinate or included within others, church organizations, and then you finally have hierarchical organizations themselves that have the characteristics of a network because they share these common traits. Social capital is a kind of lubricant despite formal hierarchy that allows information, for example, to pass from the lower levels of the organization horizontally rather than having to go up vertical channels. And I think all good business leaders understand that this is something that they need to cultivate. I think that to the extent that there's been flattening of hierarchies, it is absolutely based on the cultivation, the deliberate cultivation of greater levels of trust among levels in the hierarchy. And those organizations that do not understand the social capital basis for this kind of flattening are going to get into trouble. In the 1980s and 90s, the American auto industry began to copy the Japanese Kanban system of just-in-time manufacturing. What General Motors did not understand is that this was a system designed not simply to economize on inventory costs. This was a system designed to make use of local knowledge. That famous cord that every worker had in the Toyota factory that he could pull to stop the production process involved an enormous delegation of trust to that worker. It was in effect saying to that worker, we trust you to make a decision that will affect the output of the entire factory. And the workers repaid that by giving feedback to problems and not letting a single automobile go out the door until they had met those quality standards. And that is really why the Japanese excelled in and displaced American car manufacturers in the 1970s and 80s. It's something that General Motors never really ever learned, I think, as they adopted the formal system without understanding the social basis. I think it's something that Ford understood much better. Obviously, when you start talking about major types of outsourcing without social capital outside of organizational boundaries, you are not going to have the kind of communication and movement of ideas that would be possible in supply chain management, in other forms of cooperation between organizations. It obviously needs to be based on a certain sense of reciprocity. Now, let me get to the conclusions for this conference for human resource management. Of course, I think this should be obvious. The rise of large formal organizations does not eliminate the need for personal trust and for moral connections between individuals in organizations. But a lot of times that trust is rooted in values and culture. It varies tremendously from one society to another, and in many respects, operating across cultural lines requires the kind of local knowledge that gives you insight into the way that local societies are wired. They are not all alike. The types of social obligations that people incur vary. The importance of family varies. The importance of other kinds of moral debts make a big deal of difference to the way that workers are treated and treat one another. And I think the other key point is that trust is something that organizations build quite deliberately. It is important, and it is one of the great functions of leadership to cultivate not just the formal organization, but the informal social capital as well. But that was perhaps obvious. What's maybe less obvious is that it is also quite possible to have too much trust. In many respects, the Japanese corporation with the seniority lifetime employment system was an organization built around tightly bonding workers to the organization. But when that organization got into big trouble and needed to downsize very dramatically, or when banks needed to go bankrupt in the 1990s, it was impossible for these high trust organizations to make the necessary adjustments to very different and much more demanding economic circumstances. And I think that one of the reasons that adjustment took so long in the case of Japan was precisely because there was, in a way, too much social capital in their organizations. And in many respects, it is the ability of organizations to open up to outside ideas, to break apart their corporate cultures, that leads to real innovation. So you have all sorts of dysfunctional forms of social capital that I think everybody is familiar with. Oftentimes, it is the strong ties and the strong bonds within organizations that are the deliberate obstacle or barrier to the movement of ideas, and it's oftentimes the dissident types of individuals that cross these network boundaries that are the main conveyors of new ideas. That obviously exists as well between organizations. One of the characteristics now, obviously, of the globalized world is that this is not just between national companies. This need to cultivate these sorts of network ties exist across cultural lines, across national lines as well. Again, I could give you a lot of examples of how this works, for example, in the American IT industry, in which valuable intellectual property is informally exchanged over a drink at a bar in Palo Alto or in Mountain View, rather than being exchanged through lawyers with their high transaction costs through a formal contractual relationship that exchanges intellectual property. And the system is therefore far more flexible as a result of that. But now, in a globalized world, those networks really need to be international. And I would simply conclude by saying that, in my view, although trust is oftentimes something that evokes warm feelings from many people, it is not obvious that it is always the best thing for organizations. You cannot have an organization that does not have trust or social capital. But since too much trust is frequently a problem, I think that in some sense the best organizations are ones that cycle between periods of greater and lesser bonding, because I think there are times in which breaking of established relationships also becomes a necessity. You have to hold people accountable when they make mistakes, when they don't perform, when they're corrupt or they do other bad things. And if you have a tightly bonded organization, that is therefore very difficult. And therefore, this is perhaps only a professor could come up with this kind of balanced ending, but I do think that both shared culture and diversity are important. They're proponents of one or the other, but in a sense, I think the best organizations are ones that understand that you need both of them, and in a way, it is the evolution between these two poles as external conditions change, as internal forces arise within the organization, that is the way to manage human resources and these kinds of connections of trust within organizations. Thank you very much for your attention, and best wishes for the rest of the conference.
네, 글로벌 인적자원 포럼에 굉장한 열정을 갖고 계신 우리 프란시스 후쿠야마 존스 홉킨스 대학 교수님께서 지난해에 이어서 또 올해도 이렇게 기조연설을 해주셨습니다. 자, 이번에는 일본의 대표적인 CEO인 신 요시아키 회장님을 여러분께 소개해 드립니다. 신 요시아키 회장님은 기업의 사회적 책임 경영을 차원 높게 활성화시킨 분으로 아주 유명한 분입니다. 일찍이 기업의 상시적인 일상 업무와 기업의 사회적인 책임, 그리고 기업 활동을 연계시킨다는 발상 전환을 주창해 오셨습니다. 기업의 사회적인 책임이란 기업 활동의 중심에 사람을 두고 유능한 인재를 확보하고 양성하는 인재 전략과도 상통해 온다고 주장해 오고 계십니다. 자, 신 요시아키 회장님으로부터 글로벌 경 경제시대 위대한 기업 그리고 존경받는 기업이 되기 위해서 그 조건으로 사회적 책임 경영과 인재 경영에 대해서 연설을 듣겠습니다. 여러분, 신 요시아키 회장님의 큰 박수로 환영해 주시면 대단히 감사하겠습니다.
Thank you for very nice introduction. And also thank you for inviting me to this Global Human Resources Forum. I feel very honored to speak at wonderful occasion here in Seoul, Korea. So, may I try to introduce myself in Hangul? Before that, I will tell an interesting short story. One Japanese had the honor to make a speech in front of President of United States. He studied English very hard for his speech, had training, practice to speak in English. Then he made an English speech in front of the president perfectly, he believed. After hearing his speech, President said, Japanese is very similar to English. I learned this lesson. I tried the Hangul. 안녕하세요. 저의 이름은 진희주입니다. 성이 진입니다. 이 이름은 한국에서 왔다고 합니다. 하지만 죄송하게도 영어로 이야기를 하겠습니다. Is it understandable? Okay, thank you very much. Today, in my speech, I would like to focus on 3 key points. The first is that quality of product and services depend on the quality of people or human resources. Secondly, based on this understanding, I talk about our strategies and practices to improve quality. They are about development of staff and CSR, including lessons from our failure in the past. The third point is my personal views on the ideal human resources and management. At introduction, let me give you a brief background of our company. Our group was established in 2001 through the merger of 2 general insurance companies, Mitsui and Sumitomo, and each had a glorious history of over 100 years. Mitsui and Sumitomo were huge business groups, and their origin goes back almost 400 years. When Mitsui family and the Sumitomo family started their business. Now, our group brand is known as MSIG around the world. And so, I will say MSIG today instead of Mitsui Sumitomo Insurance Group. Unfortunately, in Japan, we have been hearing a lot of unhappy news on poor quality of product and services. On newspapers, we see corporate apologies and announcement of product recall almost every day. In fact, consumers have started taking a severe look at companies. Similarly, the new law which protect consumers dealing with financial instruments show that company must carry out responsibility to protect consumers in many ways. This means company must always improve the quality of product and services in order to meet customer needs. How can we achieve this? I believe that the quality of product and services depend on the quality of staff. 여러분, 그렇죠? Okay, thank you. This applies particularly to insurance and financial areas because insurance and financial products are invisible. We cannot see them. It is difficult to show the level of quality clearly. Therefore, for example, a good explanation by an employee or agent is very important in letting customers understand the product. In other words, each and every employee and agent themselves truly represent the quality. I also think that there must be a lasting relationship between insurance company and customers. Therefore, a company cannot grow without improving quality to meet customer needs. In order to become more competitive and achieve a continuous and stable growth, a lot of good human resources are necessary. I believe that this is essential to ensuring a good corporate culture. In Japan of last year, in June of last year, the Japanese FSA, Financial Service Agency, gave us sanction to suspend some of our operations. This was mostly due to non-payment of many claims under special coverage, mainly automobile and medical insurance policies. Other insurers are faced with the same problems. Let me explain the background and our actions for improvement and prevention. Since our new company started 6 years ago, we took somewhat aggressive strategy in many ways. We have admit for example, we place too much priority on developing new products and expanding the sales. So we had problems such as failure to pay claims, damaging the interest of the customers. After that, we decided to establish a new management plan, which we call New Challenge 10, together with all group employees to achieve higher corporate quality. In August last year, we started a special project, what we call Create and Change Project, to make this management plan New Challenge 10. This project also aims at create corporate culture where staff think and act by themselves and ensure good communication and teamwork. In this project, we held meetings at 120 locations around the world to exchange frank opinions. In these meetings, our staff could exchange their views directly with the president, directors, and myself. I also attended about 30 meetings. At each meeting, I spent 3 to 5 hours listening to opinions and proposals of our staff. I do consider this as one of the realization of our CSR-oriented management, as we value opinions and feedback of employees. Our mission statement, which include our ultimate goal, comes at the top of MSIG's management structure. Our Charter on Professional Conduct tells the rule of action for all group employees to achieve this mission. The Charter on Professional Conduct defines our responsibility for 7 stakeholders, which include our customers, shareholders, agents, business partners, employees, local communities, and global environment. Our corporate message, which showed the spirit of our Charter on Professional Conduct, also come from this project. The message is, for all the things you care about, for all the things you care about. In Hangul, 한 명 한 명 하나 하나로 소중히 합니다. This is our corporate message. To achieve our mission statement, Mutual Intent set our target vision up to the year 2010 and the strategy to achieve this vision. We recognize quality improvement as a starting point of all business. In other words, we need to sell easy to understand products which are best for each customer, and explain enough details clearly and politely. This also involves ensuring a quick and polite response in accident and smooth payment of claims. We regularly review the business process for the basic strategy and try to make it better. Through these improvement quality, we hope to get the trust of customers, to have more MSIG supporters. The stronger trust among our customers will create a positive cycle. This can grow our business, and therefore we can invest the profit for further quality improvement. With this positive cycle of quality, trust, and growth, MSIG aims to meet responsibilities for our stakeholders to achieve CSR-oriented management. This is why we must improve quality in various points. In order to improve quality, we will make a framework where we can listen to the voice of stakeholders, such as customers, agents, and staff, so that our policies reflect these opinions. As mentioned before, the quality of employees is very important. In service industries like insurance, to support employee growth, we are promoting what we call staff all-active strategy. In this strategy, we improve learning opportunities and training system to support the individual growth and satisfaction, also to increase their motivation. We make a self-empowerment program and a fair and just evaluation system. We are working hard to achieve a balanced growth in 5 business areas, which are domestic non-life insurance, life insurance, overseas business, financial service business, and risk management business. Of course, we have high hopes for our overseas business as a growth field. In the portfolio of MSIG's overseas business, the share by local business is expanding recently. Along with this, the number of national staff has increased significantly. They now account for about 6,000 of the total 24,000 employees in our group. By the way, this month marks the 5th year since we opened an office here in Korea and started underwriting in 2002. The office scale is still small, but the number of our staff is steadily increasing, who are mostly Korean nationals. 여러분의 많은 사랑 부탁드립니다. In Asia, we, MSIG, are one of the leading insurance company groups with the huge insurance premium on the network. In our global strategy on human resources, we respect the individuality of employees and diversity of cultures and customs around the world. In this way, we promote mutual understanding. At present, we are providing various training seminars for staff in many levels and sections to share values and exchange practical know-how. Also, we have active human resources interaction among group companies and head office. Thus, we will develop human resources needed for global management. Our other strategies to improve quality is social contribution and environment protection. There are plenty of examples of our activities. MSIG is a leading member of Global Compact in United Nations, and our business activities are in line with its principles. In this program, MSIG leads the Japanese business community by encouraging many companies to be better corporate citizens. As for our operation around the world, currently we have non-life insurance business in 280 major cities in 37 countries, and are committed to CSR management in various ways. Especially in Asia, we intend to support the sound growth of the insurance market. For example, we conduct the programs of technical assistance and training in non-life insurance products and services for insurance authorities and employees of insurance companies. We are also promoting protection of the global environment over the last 6 years. For example, in Indonesia, we have planted about 300,000 trees in the 300-hectare wildlife reserve that has been logged illegally. And we also want to try our best to make contribution to stop the global warming. In this Indonesian project, we are also donating textbook, stationaries, and sports gears to primary schools so that we can work together with the local residents for a long time. In September, I visited primary school and asked the local children to take good care of trees we planted together. With sparkling eyes, the children gave me poems and pictures they had made themselves and said they would respect trees and nature. These activities can make contribution to the local community as well as to environment protection. Also, our staff in Indonesia are very proud of this activity. At MSIG, all our companies and branches make social contribution of their own under the motto, one campaign of social contribution each year. For example, here in Korea, our MSIG colleagues cleaned mountains in Bukhansan National Park near Seoul. Another example is the Smile Heart Club, founded by concerned employees. The club collects donations from members. They work together. The kids ask fun to make Christmas cards and sell them. The profit was donated to the children living in areas affected by war or disasters around the world. In conclusion, I would like to say a few words about the role of corporate culture in human resources development. Without sympathy and the daily practice of each staff, even if our management plan is beautiful, we cannot improve corporate quality. If each staff think with customer-focused mind, think and act by himself, ensure good communication and teamwork, and contribute to society, these daily practices will create a true corporate culture. MSIG is a member of huge business group, as I mentioned before, built by Mitsui and Sumitomo families and has a history of nearly 400 years. Both families has been directed toward CSR-oriented management. Mitsui's focus was on developing human resources, while Sumitomo focused on ensuring harmony with the environment. The tradition of Mitsui and Sumitomo is the foundation of the corporate culture of MSIG. We have DNA of these families. Excellent corporate culture and valuable human resources are closely linked, and they work for each other. Good corporate culture develops good personnel, and good personnel create good corporate culture. Under the rich corporate culture, MSIG will develop employees and will work together to achieve New Challenge 10. I believe that this is the way for MSIG to bring security and safety to people and the business around the world. and make contribution to the society. 여러분들에게 스피치할 수 있어서 기뻤습니다. 다음엔 한국어로 도전해 보겠습니다. 감사합니다. Thank you very much.
네, 대단히 감사합니다. 일본의 대표적인 CEO 가운데 한 분인 신 요시아키 회장으로부터 이 사회적 책임 경영과 인재 경영에 관한 연설을 들으셨습니다. 이상으로 글로벌 인적자원 포럼 2007 개막식 행사와 기조연설 1부를 모두 마치겠습니다. 여러분께서 잠시 휴식을 취한 후에 기조연설 2부를 시작하겠습니다. 지금 시각이 10시 30분을 좀 넘었는데요. 한 10시 50분까지 이 자리에 다시 착석해 주시면 대단히 감사하겠습니다. 아무쪼록 글로벌 인적자원 포럼 2007이 아주 값진 성과와 함께 성공적으로 진행되기를 기원하고요. 저는 여기서 인사드리겠습니다. 고맙습니다.